Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's episode of The Suspense is Killing Me. My name is Lucas Marino. I'm your host. And today we get the chance to hang out with the one and only Aimee Hardy. How are you?
Hi. Thanks for having me. I'm good. How are you?
I'm so excited. I get to hang out with you today. This is like the best part of the week. So we haven't seen each other since November when we were in New
Mhm.
York at an event together, the first horror reader weekend. Shout out to Christine.
Yes.
Yeah, so that was cool to meet you there in person, and,
Mhm.
unfortunately for me, and fortunately for you, you had already sold out of all the copies of Pocketful of Teeth, so I had to wait to
Yes.
get a copy, so
Yes. Yeah, and that was such a fun event. Christine's great, and I love the idea of putting authors and readers all kind of in one area for the whole weekend. That was so cool.
yeah, and we get to normally we talk about what you've got coming up next later, but
Mhm.
it's just so appropriate right now to talk about the fact that we'll be at the next Horror Reader Weekend in Fredericksburg, May 2nd through 4th. And so if you think Aimee and I are cool now, you should come hang out with us in
Yeah.
May and it'll be
In
even
person?
cooler. Yeah,
Yeah.
even cooler. So let's talk a bit about Pocket Full of Teeth,
Yeah.
which you released in 2024, correct?
In September. September 13th, which was Friday the 13th. So,
Yes, it
yes.
was. Yeah. I celebrated my wife's birthday by giving her a copy of your book that day.
Oh, perfect. Thanks.
See, so if anyone would like to do the same, you're welcome. Um,
Yes.
so how long was Pocket Full of Teeth? How long were you working on that book before you got to publication?
Yeah, that one, it's so interesting because every book has, like, a different path, and
Right.
this one hit me, and it was like, "You have to sit down and write this." And I remember just being this is so funny, on my phone with kids' practices, and I think I, typed everything basically on my phone, and it was done the first draft within a month, like, it was a fever dream of writing. I
Love it.
don't recommend it, it was very stressful, but then I edited it a little bit and, kind of tightened everything back up, submitted it to Running Wild Press, and it was accepted for publication, and I sat down with my editor, Lisa Kastner, and I was, looking for feedback, and she was like, "There's something going on with these footnotes.
Mm,
Let's explore that a little more." And so, yeah, it really evolved into what it is today. It's so cool to see because it was originally like cat story, and then there were footnotes, and it's like, okay, well, why is this here? What is this device doing? And so
right.
she gave me a chance to really dive in and look at how structure informs the narrative,
Mm.
and I thought that was so cool. So, yeah, a
Such
long time of editing, but short writing in the beginning.
I might be okay with that for like the process of
Mhm.
writing being quick is usually an indication that you're onto something.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
that you're really in the groove, you're really feeling something, you're really trying to get this story out of your head because, for whatever reason, it's got your attention, it's captured your interest. And then you can spend all the time playing with it in edits that you
Yeah.
want, right? Like, so that's to me, that's
Mhm.
a sign that you're onto something. And not that I'm the arbiter of that decision for anyone else but myself, but usually when I feel that kind of motivation or fire, it's usually at least to me, a good sign of what I'm doing is what I'm supposed to be doing.
Mhm.
Now, for those that are unfamiliar with Pocket Full of Teeth, can you kind of briefly describe the overarching story?
Yeah, so it starts off with a woman being interviewed by police, and she says, "Look, to tell you exactly what happened with this body that was found, I need to talk about this haunted manuscript." And so it goes back and forth between this transcript of her interview and this found manuscript, and we kind of see these two women's lives intersect. So it's pretty neat how they kind of flow back and forth.
Now, I was a cold reader when I walked into this, and I
Hmm.
do this often with books. So people that watch the show might be or listen to the show might be a little tired of hearing me say this, but sometimes I will jump into books without reading the descriptions at the recommendations of someone else, or I'll meet a really great author and I'm like, I want to read your book, or whatever the case may be. And I like going in kind of blind sometimes,
Mhm.
maybe only seeing your cover art. And so
Yeah.
that was my exposure to your story before I opened the book, was just how beautiful this cover is and how well it fits in this kind of Southern Gothic
Mhm.
kind of bend. I thought the cover's brilliant. And I love the way you've got the color balance and everything. So it's a very
Mhm.
attractive book. Um,
Thank you.
when I stepped into it, I wasn't sure um, whether I was going to get a haunted house story, or if I
Mhm.
was going to get a true crime, or not true crime, but like a crime kind of adjacent psychological horror kind of story.
Mhm.
And it became immediately apparent to me that it was going to be more along the lines of that Southern Gothic feel. And I'm
Mhm.
curious, as a fellow Gothic writer, if you feel like some readers have an expectation regarding pacing, or um, maybe depth, because I feel like Gothic stories today are held against a different standard than maybe some of our other contemporary Gothic writers even 20,
Mhm.
30 years ago. Like, they like, readers want a different, some readers, not all readers, obviously. There are no absolutes, friends. Would love a different, some people love a slow burn. Some people want to be dragged like at light speed through a story. And I feel like
Mhm.
sometimes we lose sight of the fact that a Southern Gothic often comes with this wonderful immersion where you sit
Mhm.
in this story and you're supposed to sit in this story. And it's not supposed to rip you through there quickly. It's not a
Yeah.
slasher. You're supposed to taste this thing. Like, you're supposed to just
Mhm.
experience this through the eyes of someone who isn't experiencing something rapidly in the story. And
Mm.
so I think that sometimes the Gothic readers and writers can become a little misaligned on pacing.
Yeah.
I've kind of felt a little bit maybe of that tension in the book, where I didn't think anything of the pacing, but then when I go to read some of the reviews, I get people that say, this was a slow burn, and I'm like, was it?
Mhm.
I didn't really
Yeah.
feel slow burn. So, how do you
Yeah.
feel about the pacing, and do you feel like it's a slow burn, or do you feel like it's not?
I mean, I feel like Gothic usually is a little bit of slow burn. I mean,
Yep.
it's really all about that character, and the setting is almost like a person. And the way I wanted to approach this work was, how do you recover from like the worst thing that has happened to you? So we kind of go alongside Kat, in the found manuscript, we follow her journey. And so she's returning home to her childhood house. Her mother has passed away, and she's at this pivotal moment where she's becoming an adult as well. So you have all of these things, all of these pressures put on her. And so I was really inspired by my upbringing in the South. I was born and raised right outside of Atlanta, and really wanted to lean into Southern storytelling. And it's interesting because I feel like a lot of people don't understand the South is very academic as well. So I have footnotes and lots of research went into this. But all of that is to allow you as the reader to sit in the story. You're reading the footnotes and interacting with that and putting together all these pieces. Like, you're doing a lot of work as the reader. And even though it is slow, it kind of gives you a chance to play with, okay, what are all these pieces? How do they all fit together? How is it moving and why? And what does that have to do with me and my role as the reader? Because there's even some lines about, this book in your hands, like it references you, the reader. So I'm excited, even if it is, quote unquote, a slow burn. I was really excited to bring all these pieces together and engage the reader in that way, which I feel like a lot of books don't do. But as Gothic writers, I mean, that's right up our alley.
Yeah, I love that you kind of uh, show that value in a slow burn, because this is no hate against a lot of the contemporary horror, but I feel like a lot of it's more based on the higher speed action based
Hmm.
exposure that people have to the slasher genres and some of the more, I don't want to say everything extreme, but a lot of the more extreme stuff or more edgy kind of contemporary horror leans into those different paces. And I've played with pacing quite a bit in my own. Burn the Girls has a slower burn to it than, say, Bless the Mother. And
Mhm.
all of that was intentional. Like, I felt like um, that story deserved the slow burn exposure, and the follow up um, wouldn't let it be a slow
Mm.
burn. The whole time I
Yeah.
was writing it, I was trying to hit the brakes and it just wouldn't let me. So
Yeah.
I feel like as the person on the other end of the story, the writer, you kind of are at the mercy of how this story wants to be told, and you're not
Mhm.
necessarily 100% in control of whether it's going to move at a certain pace or not, as an initial manuscript. And then once
Mhm.
that's done, then you can kind of sit back and say, does it feel even? Because you
Mhm.
could have a slow burn that's an even story and it feels natural. But you're
Yeah.
not jerking the reader around. So yeah, I don't see slow burn as a negative thing whatsoever. And I
No.
would like to take people up on that. If you think that Anne Rice or Stephen King or any of these
Mm.
other people who literally raised us,
Yeah.
um,
Yeah.
they've been guilty of influencing our thinking on this to a certain degree. Also, as a big
Mhm.
fan of classic literature,
Yeah.
I mean, it's kind of baked in the cake. So
Mhm.
I feel
Well, a
like
lot of Pocket Full of Teeth is actually, it's very Southern Gothic, but it also has like Shirley Jackson and all of these sort of Gothic
right.
nods. But the device of the transcript being, first person from this lady was inspired by Dolores Claiborne.
I love it.
And yeah, Stephen King kind of starts out with just Dolores speaking and she's having this big confession. So I was really like, okay, this is a neat device. How could I work this in? But in a way where I'm telling it and it's serving this story. So yeah, I feel like even though we think of King as being like, like lots is happening and he's covering all these things and it's pushing you along, like sometimes he's soft and I think that's really, really cool.
Yeah, Dolores Claiborne's an excellent example of that. I mean,
Mhm.
um, even in the movie, it's a slow
Yeah.
burn movie. I mean, I
Yeah.
felt like the movie was slower than the book to a certain degree.
Mhm. Yep.
But what a story. You cannot tell that
Yeah.
story any differently, and pull it off to the same measure. So kudos to you
Mhm.
for keeping that in focus while you were writing this book. Now, okay. So talk to me a little bit about what inspired this story, because this isn't something that just popped into your head one day, is it? Or is it?
I mean, I felt like I take long walks and I'm constantly having these characters that kind of come to me and I'm like, "Oh, this person's really interesting. Oh, that person's really interesting." And then one day, I was playing with like bits of language. So I had taken a poetry workshop and they were suggesting you put together unconventional phrases. And so I had looked up a bunch of horror movie descriptions and I took little descriptions from each one and kind of put them together. And then all of a sudden there was this story of in my head, I guess, of this girl who returns home after her mother has passed away and her trying to figure out, who was her mother, what kind of legacy does that lead when you don't really know who your mother is and
Hmm.
not really deep down as a person. You see your mom as sort of this, I don't know, just she's the mom, that's it, like that's who she is. But then as she's growing up she understands that my mom is a person and there's all these complexities behind that. um
Moms are awesome.
so they are complex. Like
Yes.
that's a relationship that there's so many things within it, even healthy relationships with moms. So, yeah, this sort of unhealthy relationship, it really struck me with like, how do you get closure, when you don't really know this person or you don't know all of the things that they had gone through? What does that look like, especially in her life as she's about to turn 18? What does that look like? And then it turned into a short story, which was published by Stone Coast Review, and it's called The Spinning of the Teacups. And from there, the story just it wouldn't let me go. So I knew I wasn't done with it.
Mm.
And then I was like, well, worst case, I'll take a month. I'll write a bunch of stuff, low stakes on my phone at the kids' practices. And yeah, Cat sort of came out of it. And that was really, really cool. And I was really inspired afterwards, working with my editor to make it even broader and have even more depth. That process was just so cool. I can't repeat it, so I don't know what the magic sauce was in it, but it was a really neat experience.
It may have been Cat,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know?
And that's the hardest thing is, the person who's, like, telling all of this. So my editor was asking, who are the footnotes from? Who's telling the story? What's going on? And I remember for, like, a month, I'm, like, pulling my hair out, like, I don't know. It's someone. And then one day it was like a light bulb, and I was like, obviously, it's someone who's telling the story, but doesn't want you to know that they're telling it. And I was like, "Oh, it's someone that wants to be invisible, someone that wants to be super likable, and you trust them, and you wanna get to know them." So yeah, Edie Sparrow was sort of born out of that.
That's so cool. When you so you made a decision that I also had to make at one point, and I caught a lot of questions about this, and I'm interested in your perspective on this. But when you write an 18-year-old character,
Mhm,
it can put you in a situation where you totter on the edge or teeter on the edge of YA to adult,
mhm,
and it wasn't something that I necessarily thought about until I was part of the way through my manuscript, and I said, "Oh, I wonder if this will impact perception of the story before anyone reads it," because it's definitely a an adult horror,
mhm,
gothic story, but it does have younger characters in it, and there's a bit of coming of age because of the age,
mhm.
which is unavoidable when you have an 18-year-old character, as far as I'm concerned, or you'd be deviating from
Yeah.
reality. So, talk to me about that a little bit from your perspective. How did you feel about writing an 18-year-old character? Was it something that you had to bat around with before you finally settled on it, or did she just naturally come to you that way and you just rolled with it?
Yeah, I originally had written her older, so she was an adult, and then kind of coming to terms with her adult, version of her mother. But it just never really felt right. And since I discovered Edie Sparrow, who's telling the story, I allowed myself a little bit of grace to embrace still, this gothic style and have this atmosphere, even though it wouldn't be true necessarily to the voice of a 18-year-old girl. I knew that because of the framing and the genre that it would be okay if I kind of leaned into that gothic nature and didn't necessarily maybe let it go to adolescent, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
But yeah, that was definitely a consideration of like, how old is she? Where do we meet her in the story? Those are all kind of things that you just have to work out as you go, and I tried to be a little fearless, I guess, in it and just change things. That's one of the things that, like, thank goodness we have all the version histories that we can have in our documents, because there were lots of different experiments that I sort of threw together, and this one felt right. There's no other word. It just had to be this way.
Perfect. Perfect, perfect. So I think that's when you can be confident as the writer of the story that regardless of how anyone else responds to that, you've done the right
Mhm.
thing because you know that it was the right thing to do. It's the right way to write the character. It's the right way to tell the story.
Mhm.
It's the right POV or whatever the case may be. Um, yeah, love that. So with that in mind, um, was there anything that surprised you as you got to know these characters? Like this, and it doesn't necessarily have to be just, Eddie or just Cat, for example. Like, was there any element of these characters that kind of surprised you as you went through the writing process?
I mean, I feel like the main character was constantly surprising, because she, like, refused to be seen, and I had so much fun with her because she was so, like, slippery, and it was okay for her to kind of move in this way that, you think it's going one way and then it's going another, and I don't she was just really, really fun to get to know as, you know as hopefully as the reader is,
Yeah, but there's some exploration in that. The way you've
yeah.
got it written, it doesn't just it leaves a lot to be curious about, and, I think
Mhm.
that's really cool because it keeps people engaged.
Yeah.
That kind of stuff brings me back. I hate to say it, but I kind of gauge my interest in a story on a very subconscious level. Like,
Mhm.
it's not about like how much it's making me question things or enjoy certain things. It's more about like when I set that book down, do I feel a subconscious draw to pick it back up? That's almost
Mhm.
like always my litmus test for whether I really am enjoying something or not. Um, and it could be anything from the more wild stuff like Brian Bowyer knows that I absolutely adore him and his
Mhm.
writing, but I don't write anything like Brian does. And I cannot put a Brian Bowyer book down when I pick it up because,
Yeah.
I'm afraid that well, sometimes I have to put it down. And Brian would be laughing if he heard me say that because he knows exactly what I'm talking about. His stuff can be a little
Mhm.
brutal, right? It's like, I need a break from this from just a minute, but
Yeah.
I think the same could be said of a lot of Gothic literature, wherein I
Mhm.
just cannot wait to be I want to be dipped back in it. I need to be back in that soup, in that
Yeah.
atmosphere, with those characters, exploring those unanswered questions. And
Mhm.
I think that's kind of the kind of a hidden benefit to reading a story that's structured the way yours is that you don't you can't just set that book down and have your conscience satisfied.
Mhm.
You have to come back.
Yeah. And it's so interesting because 'cause I'll have different readers come in and say, "When they say this, do they really mean this other thing?" Like, they have all these theories, which I think is really cool because each person can kinda take the characters and read into them how they would like, or they can just read it very straightforward. It's pretty neat to see them kinda play with the story as well.
Yeah, that makes it a different experience for every reader, right?
Mhm.
It's did you get
Yeah.
any flack on that from your editor or
No, she was basically like, "Just go with it. We trust
nice.
you," which was
Nice.
intimidating at first.
Yeah, I mean, I've had some pretty I would say editors that work really close
Mhm,
when it comes to controls on things like that, and then others that are a little bit more forgiving of that. And the ones that work a little closer and a little bit more tight to the story like that tend to I mean, obviously it's still up to you as the writer, but
mhm,
they might express some not concerns, but some opinions on how much of you should leave up to the reader and how much you should not leave up to
mhm.
the reader. So I think it's really cool that you took that step because that is a little bit risky for a writer.
Yeah. Yeah, and I mean, there is an ending, so if you haven't read it, like, you're not gonna just leave and it just ends and that's it. There is an ending,
Yeah.
but there is a lot that you could kinda read into it. It could mean maybe a few different things. So, I always think it's fun. I really like endings where, you have an ending, but then it's like, "But what if?" You
Right.
know?
Yeah. Yeah. I don't need to be told every little thing.
Yeah.
I like having some control over it. I kind of equate that to when you hear lyrics, but you don't read them to a song and
Mhm.
you've got your
Yeah.
own version of this song in your head. There's some musicians that refuse to publish their lyrics because of that.
Mhm. Yeah.
They want the listener to kind of have their own experience.
Mhm.
Um, which I might be dating myself a little bit here because, that mentality has come out of like the printed
Mhm.
music media industry where they used to put the lyrics inside albums or cassette
Yeah.
tapes or CD pamphlets, and then
Yeah.
yeah, I don't even know if like there's probably people listening to this like, what are you talking about, dude? It's like, look, man, I'm in my mid 40s. I can't help it. So talk to me a little bit about like your writing leading up to this story
Mhm.
because this wasn't the very first thing you've obviously done. You've been doing this for a while. So tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
your writing journey leading to this book.
Yeah, so I had always been interested in writing. I was a big reader growing up, and I read, everything I could get my hands on. Like, I was always in our school library, I was always reading something. Um, So I just enjoyed stories, and
Mm.
so I went to college, and I had already taken basically all of my English classes while I was in high school, of my college English classes, so I was enrolled in these upper level courses, and I remember writing, like, the first essay, which I always got, 100s on even in these advanced courses, and I got, like, a C on it, and she was like, "Yes, it's all very good, but what does it matter?" And I was like, "What?" So it really pushed me to just think about my purpose and my role as a writer, and really wrestle with story, how story is told, what does it mean to me, why does it mean that. And so in college, I decided I wanted to go more into writing. I taught like college and high school courses for I think I don't know 8 years, something like that, and then went into editing and publishing my own short stories and poetry and that sort of thing. And I really enjoy short story. It's a really fun medium, but wanted to write something longer. So I've been working on a few projects, and then Cat kind of came out and really caught me. And I was working on that for probably a year, editing it. And now, yeah, I'm just sort of following some other muses. So it's been a
Mm.
neat process in being an admirer of story and really sort of honing that craft and seeing something like Pocket Full of Teeth come to fruition has been the coolest process.
Yeah, it really is. I could
Mhm.
tell immediately when we met that you were still, like, liquored up on how good it felt to have that book out. I mean, it's
Yeah.
fairly recent. We were, like, what, 60 days, I think,
Mhm.
not even from the release date. I
Yeah.
think we were just a month and a half from your release date, and,
Mhm.
that that fills me with motivation and an inspiration when I see someone feel that way about their own story, so it's really cool. So obviously you're still working and you're doing things and you're writing. And I know we can't talk about titles because we have a whip that is currently being whipped into shape. But
Yes.
this is another Southern Gothic, correct?
Yes, it is. And this one is I was really struck by this idea of the South being a place where it's maybe very religious, but then it's also very superstitious.
Oh, that's
So
true.
I have a story that's kind of it straddles the line between the two. So it one of the main characters is a pastor and, very God-fearing, loves the Bible, but then there is another character in it who is this crazy like mountain woman and she does miracles.
Nice.
And I think we've all known like, this stereotype of like mountain, herbs and all these, tricks and tips from the South. And I really wondered, okay, if we could mix that with this pastor, what would happen? This kind of conflict between the two, but then also
Hmm.
the similarities. Their aim is to heal people and to heal humanity. So what does that look like when they're right next to each other and they interact with each other?
Oh, that's super cool.
Yeah.
Nice. And I can't ask about release dates, people. Sorry, you're gonna have to hang tight because
Yeah.
Amy is still working this thing. But
Mhm.
uh, I find that fascinating, and what an interesting premise. I live in the South. I live in Southern Virginia,
Mhm.
but was not raised in a Southern family. You were native New Yorkers, and even though we were displaced, it was almost like nothing had changed.
Mhm.
Because I was still surrounded by the same type, it's the same mentalities and uh and morals and ethics and all that stuff and religion and
Mhm.
everything. And it wasn't until I became older and I got into the service and I was serving with people who had like been born and raised in the South. That's when I
Mhm.
realized like how different my experience was from people that, born and raised and lived their whole lives in the South. And it is
Mhm.
fascinating to think about. I love that you point that out, that like there's this mysterious kind of uh supernatural kind of feel to things. And I think
Mhm.
part of it is just in the land. It's like
Yeah.
it's kind of like when you talk to people about Western
Mhm.
culture and Western horror. I think when you have this expanse, this this quantity and quality of land that is
Mm,
somewhat untamed and untapped. I think the South still has so much of that flavor to it.
yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, it's wild. So, like, did you was there a particular experience with that in your life that kind of motivated you to think about that, or is it just kind of a general, insight?
Yeah, well, this idea came to me years ago. My husband was in the military and we were stationed in Chesapeake, Virginia. And the Great Dismal Swamp was out, over there next to
That's
our
where my brother
housing.
lives. Yeah.
Yeah.
He lives
And,
right next to the Great Dismal Swamp in Chesapeake.
yeah.
Great bridge.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep. But I was working in Virginia Beach, and so to get to where we were living, you had to pass by part of the Great Dismal Swamp. And I remember there was just this we had moved previously, we had lived in Hawaii and California, so it was all, very far away from the South. And I remember driving home and we had had this big rain. And so driving past the swamp after that, it was like this sharp metal smell and like earth and like it was just this visceral smell. And I was like, oh man, yes, this is kind of what the South is about. And then the main character was just, I mean, right there with me. And he was maybe having like a questioning of his faith, like, what does it mean? How do I navigate the world? How do I know if I'm a good person? How do I prove all these things? So I had a good sense of who he was from just, I mean, meeting him next to the swamp, right? On this drive home, this normal thing, and there he is. And as he's sort of telling me his story, I was like, well, what if he's right next to this, this mystical woman who can perform miracles? Would he ask for a miracle? Would he disprove her? What would he do in that situation?
Is she God sent or is she
See, we
the
don't
exact
know.
opposite? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like
Yeah.
there's so much, and it's, not to like dive too much into the religious elements of this story, but or at least the religious implications of a character like that. But
Hmm.
yeah, particularly with the, I guess you could say, like the Southern Protestant type Christian faiths, there is a totally different perspective on spirituality outside of the
Hmm.
Christian faith than there are in many of the, I guess you could say, traditional Orthodox churches.
Hmm.
Although very similar, the way they treat it and think about it is very different.
Yeah.
That would be a pretty difficult dilemma
Hmm.
for a, let's say, like Southern Baptist or a Protestant or something like that to be in, because
Yeah.
they're pretty literal with their
Hmm.
interpretation of their faith. So fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah, and I really wanted to explore. I mean, we all have that question of like, are we good inside? Or do we have a purpose? Are we fulfilling that purpose?
Mm,
And so, this ended up being, even though he's a pastor, being less about his religion per se and more about his, his purpose,
mm,
his does he fulfill all of the things he's meant to do? Is
mm.
he really good inside, or is he so fatally flawed that he will never find happiness? These are all the things that no matter what religion, a lot of people wrestle with. And
Sure.
I really wanted to put a spotlight on that. And even in Pocket Full of Teeth, we have elements of that, of just, who am I? How do I prove that I'm good and that I'm here for a reason, and how do I share that with other people? How do I make sure I'm deserving of love? We have all of these essential questions, and so I think, no matter the character, I feel like we're all really looking for that validation.
Mm.
So I don't know. It'll be interesting to see where that story lands.
Very cool. Now I'm all
Yeah.
excited. It's like I'm gonna have to sign up to like be a be a fly on the wall when that thing is finally landing.
Yep.
Um, so so talk to me a little bit about whether music inspired any elements of Pocket Full of Teeth. Are
Hmm.
you the kind of person that just feeds off of music as a writer? Is it just background? Is it nowhere even close to your art? Like, how does this work out for you?
Yeah, I really like music. At the kids' practices, I'll usually have my headphones in and I'm on my phone writing stuff, or if I'm in my office, I'll have music usually going. And for a Pocket Full of Teeth, I created playlists like for each character. So that was really fun to sit down and like, okay, what are they listening to? What kind of vibe? What are the lyrics? And I think that just adds like a different element to the character as well. So my husband is a photographer, and I was lucky enough to have him and some of our friends come and do photo shoots for each character as well. And that was so cool because it's like, I've spent months, and years with these characters. And then finally they're like real people. Like, this is Kat's bedroom. This is what
That's
it looks
pretty
like.
cool.
And yeah, it was so cool. And then it's also like a good introduction to the character. Like, if you know nothing about them, you're
Mm.
like, okay, why does Ray's toolbox have a bra in there? You know?
So so like, give me a sample of some of the music from Pocket Full of Teeth, like that either inspired it or is related to some of the characters.
Yeah.
And I am totally putting Amy on the spot right now, guys.
Yes.
I gave her no opportunity to preload this answer. So,
Well, I feel
um,
like Liz, she would love anything SZA does. Like,
okay,
she loves the good, like, slower, vibey kind of music, but also like female, she has some attitude about her, which I really like.
gotcha. Very cool. See,
Yeah.
there's always some little surprise in there. I think we were just talking about Dana McSwain before this, and she dropped Bjork on me, and I got so excited because I don't rarely get to hear someone, when do I ever get a chance to talk to someone about Bjork? It's like there's always some really cool reveal in that question. At least for me, I'm
Yeah.
a total music nerd. I guess
Yeah.
I can't call myself a musician anymore. As a former musician, someone who just plays for fun now. But that's super cool. So, like, did you feel like that changed for you moving from one story to the other, or did the musical motivations for your writing remain constant from story to story? Is it more of like a motivation for you, or is it more a motivation
Mhm.
for the mindset of a character?
Um, Probably, I mean, selfishly for me, like, I like almost like a lot going on so that I can focus. I don't know if that makes sense at all, but
Absolutely does.
yeah,
Yeah.
I definitely can't stand like a quiet room. If it's too quiet, then I'll go crazy. I'll have to go outside and start walking around. Put some music on. I definitely work best when things are happening around me and then I kind of just dive in and disappear into something.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's great. I love
Yeah.
it. Um, okay, so we got some SZA. Any surprises? Like maybe something that we wouldn't expect. I didn't expect SZA, so I'm already surprised. But like,
Yeah.
I would not have combined SZA with Southern Gothic.
Yeah. I mean, it's in there, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
I did put some Stevie Nicks in with like Edie's character. She seems very very Stevie.
Yeah. Oh, that
Yeah.
jives. Yeah, I could see
Yeah.
that. Nice, man. Okay, so talk to me a little bit about running Wild Press, because you're an
Mhm.
editor for the press, and that seems like a really cool opportunity to be able to collaborate with them, and to kind of do this outside of just your writing. You get to do editing with other people's work
Mhm.
as well. So, and you're also editing for. Am I allowed to name
Yeah,
uh,
sure.
Killer
Yeah.
Nashville? So okay, yeah,
Mhm.
you also write for Killer Nashville magazine, correct?
Mhm.
Or you
Yes.
edit for them. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, and it was so cool because I was first introduced to Running Wild Press back in 2019. They published a short story that I had and nominated me for a pushcart prize, and that was such a cool experience just working with them. And I was teaching also at the same time and developing, the literary magazines where I was teaching. And so I just was like, "Hey, Lisa, do you have any, need for editors?" And she was like, "Yeah, I have what do you want to do?" And so really, dove, headfirst into different manuscripts and that's really one of my, like, big passions is not just my storytelling, but this community that we create as authors, and also as readers, as all of us really, really dive into story, there's something that connects us together. There's something at the heart of it that just sings true. And I think that's so fascinating, not just to create our own stories, but then foster that in others. I think it's the coolest thing we could do.
Oh, that's great. And you get to I feel like it's a totally different lens as an editor of
Mhm.
someone else's work, or
Yeah.
even, you know, like the magazine, I mean, that's a totally different
Mhm.
aspect in editing fiction, for example. And I feel like I have a different brain when I'm editing someone else's work than when I'm writing my own.
Yeah.
And I feel like for readers sometimes, uh, I wasn't able to see the difference. Like
Mm.
a well edited piece of work, or when a writer works with an editor, they really help polish and accentuate the voice of the writer.
Mhm.
So I feel like it's a kind of like a super power up, it's like if you're a writer and you can get the right editor, it's like it just takes you to the next level. And it's really
Mhm.
cool that you're able to do that with other people. So
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I had always thought just growing up that an editor is like, change this, change that, like, they're the teacher with the red pen, right? And they're
yeah.
scary. But just doing, editing so much for, different mediums, um, it's really given me a chance to see that the editor is just there to help the author
Hmm.
tell the story in the best way they can. So
Right.
it's kind of like my husband always says it's like bumpers, you put bumpers on there and you're like, oh, this part doesn't quite work out. And, if you can describe why, it doesn't work out because we don't know anything about that yet. Let's add some in earlier. And you just kind of take a step back and let them do their thing. They're the author, so they had this idea, they brought it to life. So as the editor, it's like, oh, wait, we got to add that in somewhere, or this doesn't quite make sense. Um, can you think of another way to do this? And
Right.
just let them tell their story. That's the coolest thing.
Yeah, my editors always get me on spatial things like,
Yeah.
they're like, "Wait, are you at the bottom of the stairs? How far is it from the," and I'm like, "I don't, dude, I mean, it's all in my head when I'm writing, and then I'm trying to go back after 60,000 words or whatever to
Yeah.
imagine, like I could see it clear as day, but then when you have to
Mhm.
explain that, you realize, "Oh, like I haven't done a good enough
Yeah.
job of showing, what I'm seeing."
Mhm.
So anyways, I always find that fascinating, and I rarely talk about the editing process on the show, but, having you with us gives us that
Yeah.
opportunity, so
Yeah, and I
very
love
cool.
how they kind of flow, back and forth. I'll bring
Mm,
certain things as an author to my editor role, and
sure.
then vice versa. Sometimes I'll read my work and I'm like, you never said anything about where you are on the stairs. What are you doing? So I'll go back in, and it's hard to edit your own work, but at least it
Yeah.
allows you a different lens sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I had, and I'm happy to mention that Stephanie Ellis was a, proofreader for Burn the Girls. I was honored to have her,
Mm.
work with that book in any capacity because she's great. But I kind of unfairly put a bit of an editing burden on her that I didn't anticipate, right? Because
Mhm.
she asked me a couple of questions that I was like, I had made it through the editing process,
Mhm.
had made it through me writing, multiple times and all this stuff. She's like, "Whose sister is this?" Like it was one of the aunts, and I'm like, "What do you mean it's her aunt? It's an aunt?" And they're like, "Yeah,
Yeah.
but is she the mom's sister or the dad's sister?" And I'm
Mm.
like, "Oh my gosh, like I didn't I don't know. Haven't thought about that." I'm like, "Oh no." It's like the whole thing's written and I haven't thought about this very simple connection.
Yeah. Yep.
So I feel like sometimes, it's very much that the editor can help you just see this story through a
Mhm.
completely different set of eyes.
Yeah.
And you didn't intentionally dodge something or change something to fit a certain way. It's just the way it is, and they can see
Mhm.
very clearly when you've got a gap or um,
Yeah.
so it's great to be able to have that experience. And and to the benefit of a reader, right? So the readers get to
Mhm.
benefit from that. So that's really cool that you get to do that.
Yeah.
It's a bit unique. So we know that we talked a little bit in the early part of this show about Horror Reader Weekend, and that you're
Mhm.
going to be at the Horror Reader Weekend event in Fredericksburg,
Mhm.
May 2nd through 4th. So tell me a little bit about that. Like, what's that going to be like? Like, what's that experience for those that are listening that may have not attended one?
Yeah, so Horror Reader Weekend is like, it's like a sleepover with all of your favorite authors and other readers. So we really kind of shut down this space, right? And we take it over with tons of writers who are in the horror industry. Um, and we have panels, we have different readings and signings all weekend. It's usually Friday to Sunday, but there are other events sort of sprinkled in as well. We have dinners. We have like last time we had the ghost stories by the fire and like all sorts of things that Christine has come up with. And it's usually all located in, one sort of hotel or something like that
Mm.
where, you can stay up, you can have drinks, you could wake up in the morning and have breakfast with your favorite authors. And it's really a chance to connect with the community. So if you really enjoy horror, if you like creepy stories, I think it's a great event for everyone to kind of get together and just celebrate that storytelling. It's really, really cool.
Could not have said it better myself. Thank you for carrying the water for the both of us on that one. I had an absolute
Yeah,
blast in New York
me
and can't
too.
wait for the Fredericksburg event. And you
Hmm.
nailed it. I mean, being able to sit next to, I mean, I met so many cool people I never would have met
Hmm.
had I not been there. And authors, readers, there were
Hmm.
Instagram,
Yeah.
influencers and book reviewers there. And it was
Hmm.
fascinating to be able to just sit around and just chat it up, and get to know people. And it's like an intimate kind of setting.
Hmm.
Loved it. So yeah, I hope everyone will consider coming out at May 2nd through 4th. And Christine found a really cool place. It's like
Hmm.
an old industrial facility that's been converted
I
into.
can't wait. There's
Yeah,
like ghost tours, and
yeah.
oh my goch, it's gonna be so fun.
It's like a riverside mill. It's an old mill,
Yeah.
that's been converted into, like, an event space, and,
Hmm.
the hotel's super cool, and there's great stuff all within walking distance, so even if it's just like a temporary vacation for a weekend,
Hmm.
it's a great one. I know that there's people coming from all over the place, literally from all over the country to attend it, so, you guys can go check that out at horrorreaderweekend.com, and you can connect with, Christine, on all her sites and come hang out with Aimee and I. It's going to be awesome.
Yeah. Yes.
Uh, so Aimee, talk to me about Birmingham, Alabama, man, because
Yeah.
we had Ivy Grimes on here, and she and I were nerding out about that area,
Hmm.
and I think it's such a unique corner of the South.
Hmm.
I've only been there once, and I drove down there from Nashville and it was to attend Furnace Fest, which is a
Yes.
big concert
At
there.
Sloss. Yes.
Yes, exactly. So we talked about the furnaces,
Mhm.
and for anyone who's listening and hasn't had a chance to, listen to that episode, go check out the episode with Ivy Grimes. We talk about Sloss Furnace, and a friend of mine's band was playing, and so he's like, "Come on down, dude. We'll get you in." And I thought it was such a cool place. And as an engineer, I was aware of it because the aeronautical engineering community is so big there.
Mhm.
But like, did you guys decide to settle there because you're not originally from there? So tell me a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I'm originally from, like, right outside of Atlanta,
Mhm.
and my husband actually went to the same high school that I did, and we were really good friends, started dating in college, and got
Awesome.
married, and then he went into the Marine Corps, and so we traveled for years. We were in, Maryland, in San Diego, and Hawaii, and Virginia, like, all these different places, and his contract was up, and his dad said, "Hey, we have some family land right outside of Birmingham. Would you be interested in moving back to the South?" And so we bought our house and moved back, in the South. And Birmingham's really cool because it's like when I grew up in Atlanta, it wasn't quite as crazy. Like it wasn't as built up. It was still a major city, but we didn't have all of the filming industry there. And um it's changed so much just in we were gone like 15 years, but I mean, just it has, a whole new face on it, right?
Yeah,
And so moving to Birmingham, I had never even thought that I would move, back to the South once I was, out of Atlanta. But Birmingham is just so refreshing because it still has that like small town feel, if that makes sense, but it's a
sure.
city. And then it's also like you can drive to Atlanta, in an hour and a half, 2 hours. So it's not too far. But it's really cool because there are still like Sloss is still here, and that's an old like haunted iron facility. It's
So
so
cool.
cool. But there's tons of little things like that about the city. We have all these walking ghost tours because there's all of these things that have happened in the city. It's very historically relevant, even still today, there are things going on. We have of course, our ghost sightings, but then also with like civil rights and things like that. It's really changed the South. And I don't know, it's also like a foodie city, so there's always
Hmm.
something to do, there's always some kind of food festival or new restaurant that's doing something, so it does stay current as well. It's really neat to kinda have the best of both worlds.
See, I asked that question. So some people might be like, "Why are you asking that question on a podcast about, mainly horror writing, and
Mhm,
the stories?" But I feel like there's this, um, I mean, obviously a tremendous influence on the writers, their
mhm,
environment, and then also we get a peek into that environment through their words, through their stories.
mhm.
And until I had an opportunity to travel some of the country areas I never would have imagined going to and experiencing them through other people's eyes and with other people. It was just it's totally different for me. It's a foreign concept. I mean, most of my family that are still in New York will never leave New York City. They couldn't imagine anything else of interest outside of that little world. And it's a big world, but it's a small world, but it's a big
Yeah,
world, and it's like
yeah.
so the idea of exploring places like Birmingham, Alabama, or Atlanta, I've spent time in North Carolina to visit friends, and I was like, "This is like another planet from
Yeah,
what I
yeah.
had experienced," and it was kind of really cool. It kind of was informative, and it showed me a
Mhm.
lot about the people that I had grown fond of that were, grew up in that area, and so it explains a lot about them,
Yeah.
and so I think it's really cool that you have the opportunity to do that. I'm in a similar situation here in Williamsburg where I, live in a
Mhm.
big small town, and we're
Yeah.
35 minutes from downtown Richmond, um, but
Mhm.
but I get to live in this, quaint little kind of fake, like world of like there's still like, it's a living museum. It's kind of wild.
Mhm.
But
Yeah.
that does inform a lot of the way I feel about the stories I write, and particularly Gothic
Mhm.
literature, because I feel like there's a tremendous amount of influence in that area where you're at right now on
Mhm.
those kinds of stories. You could
Yeah,
Southern Gothic
and
culture.
I feel like it really shows up in Pocket Full of Teeth because I reference a lot of real towns and, like, around Birmingham, a lot of these, like, old, maybe they were a coal mine or maybe they were, I don't know, they were a agricultural
Mm,
center. Now they're going through this rapid transformation of being, sort of residential areas where you have really nice neighborhoods going up and you have the Targets and the Starbucks, and they're
mm,
they're sort of taking over what used to be these old-timey downtown areas. So it's really neat, this identity shift also, not only with the characters in Pocket Full of Teeth, but also with the land. There's something happening with, this identity of the place. There it's sort of having its own coming of age, if you will. What is it? It has all of this money, all of these, new jobs, new houses.
Mm.
but what is that identity when it's reinvented? What does that look like?
Yeah, I
And
mean, you
yeah,
find a
that's
lot
what
of
we're going through.
yeah, exactly, and I think you
Mhm.
hear a lot of people, like, unpack topics like that around major metropolitan areas in the South, like New
Mhm.
Orleans, for example. It's like a city that's very rich in culture, and it is has an unmistakable identity, right? Like,
Mhm.
it's got this they're very much about, like, celebrating the culture of New Orleans.
Yeah.
So you can't go to New Orleans and not enjoy the culture of New Orleans and
Mhm.
expect to ever wanna go back there again because that is it. Like, that is New Orleans. There's no way to twist it. That is what that city is, and I always find that fascinating because you could talk to people that are inspired by that, and
Mhm.
obviously, if you're an Anne Rice fan, it's hard to not enjoy seeing that city through your own
Mhm.
eyes after you've spent so much time reading about that culture in the context of these fictional stories.
Yep.
And so I find it fascinating that we can connect those same dots in areas that are less populated, less well known, but
Mhm.
through our own stories and through the things that we're reading today, which is really cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm such a nerd right now. Listen to this. Ugh, ugh. So this might be where Rebecca Cuthbert would be going, suburban horror or suburban gothic. Like, she
Yeah.
educated me on that. I was like, oh, I never considered suburban gothic, and you're right. This is
Mhm.
so yeah.
But I really do think that, like, traveling has changed how I look at the South. Because I remember being young and being like, "I hate the South, I gotta get out, I have to
Mm,
do all these things, I have to go to New York and LA, and, to be a serious artist, I have to do certain things." And it was only when I came back to the South that I was like, there is something magical about this place, like,
mm,
the way it smells, the way it feels, the culture here, the way people interact with each other, the way they speak. I
yeah.
remember like coming back to the South and like people just saying these like one-liners that only Southerners can say, and you're like, "Wait, what?" Nervous as a cat in a room full of rocking chairs. Like, where do you get this stuff? Like, but there's a poetry about it, and there's like, it's how we relate to each other that I just find so fascinating. And it's, I mean, it's so story worthy. Like, I couldn't have come up with that line.
Yeah. Yeah, it is pretty interesting. I got
Yeah,
my first taste of that living in Charleston. That's the furthest south I've
yeah.
ever lived. We
Hmm.
were in I was in Connecticut when I got orders to Charleston, and everyone's like, "You're gonna love it, but
Yeah,
it is another world." And I was like, "Okay."
yeah,
And we spent 2 years down there, and it was absolutely another world. I mean,
yeah.
there were elements of the culture there I just could not wrap my head around.
Hmm.
But it was also before this massive boom that Charleston has been
Hmm.
embroiled in this last I guess I could say now the last decade. We left right
Hmm.
before this massive influx of people from other areas of the country. And but it was like this old, flavorful, like you were not from there and there was no mistaking that, but you could experience and enjoy their culture
Hmm.
uninhibited. There wasn't like
Yeah.
there was this opposition to you being there. And I say that because it was before the boom. And I know that like since then people are like, go back to Ohio. They're like, yeah, I know. They're just all wound up because, I think the line got drawn when people started seeing other sports teams in their stores. They were like,
Oh,
wait, what is
yeah.
this? Like, there's certain things you can't mess with down there. College football is one
Mhm.
of them.
Yes. Well, in Alabama, yeah, if you're not a
Yes.
Bama fan around here, like, what are you doing?
Yes. Yeah, that is life or death stuff. So,
Yeah.
yeah, I'd never experienced that until I lived in
Mhm.
in that area and was like, "Wow, they are serious about this stuff." Like, and there's just certain elements of the culture that you can't, I don't know, I didn't expect it. So, like, you go to the DMV, for example, and
Mhm.
you're miserable. I'm like, "I was
Yeah.
miserable." And then you get up to the lady, and she's the nicest human you've ever met. I'm like,
Yeah.
"Why are you so nice right now? I'm so upset." Like, "Why aren't you as upset as I am? Like, why aren't we miserable together?"
Yeah.
And it almost felt like they were trying to disarm me,
Mhm.
'cause, here I am out of control inside in this roiling little mind of mine. So, anyways, I always appreciate that perspective of 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 how unique the South can be, and that Southern Gothic gives us an opportunity to kind of show other people that world through that lens. And it's pretty cool. I think
Mhm.
it's a really cool opportunity. So keep
Yeah.
writing the Southern Gothic, Aimee. We need it.
Yes, I
Um,
will.
we need it. Okay, so tell people a little bit about where they can learn more about you, where they can keep up with your writing.
Yeah, so you can go to my website, amyhardy.com, and I have lots of short stories, poems. I write blogs on there,
Mm.
just tons of resources. I'm also on Instagram, Amy and Hardy, and always post on there what we're up to. We recently moved, so like all of my decorating and stuff is going on there soon. Yeah, tons of what I'm up to is usually Instagram. You can find me. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. So guys, go follow Aimee. Keep up with her. Go get Pocket Full of Teeth. Push it into your brain. Prepare yourself for the next story when it's ready. And
Yes.
come visit us in May at Horror Reader Weekend in Fredericksburg, Virginia. This way, if you can't get as far south or as far, down to Alabama, at least you can hang out in Virginia
Yes.
and have a good time nerding out about all the Southern Gothic stuff with us in person. So, all right. Well, Aimee, thank you so much for joining me. And oh, before we leave, I'm not leaving by myself. Do you have any recommendations? Anything cool you've read lately that you think people might latch onto?
Yeah, I just read you We Used to Live Here,
I have
and
not read that yet.
it's so I looked on the Horror Writers Association, their reading list, and this was listed as a debut novel. And
Mm,
I was like, let me check this out because I've kind of heard about it, different readers talking about it. And I could not believe this was a debut work. It's very meta horror, so right up my alley. Um, Absolutely loved it, and it's about a woman who gets a knock on the door, and it's a man that's like, "Hey, I used to live here. Would you mind my family and I kind of just looking, see how the place is doing?" So yeah, these people come and, nothing can go wrong, right?
yeah, there's nothing risky about that scenario.
Yeah, but really, really enjoyed that one.
I love that. I love that premise too because I don't, maybe I'm a maniac or something, but like I've wanted to do that, but I've not wanted to do that,
Mhm,
right? Like who doesn't want to go back to the house they grew up in and just walk
mhm.
around and see what it looks like through adult eyes.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
you
I know,
know,
and he has his family with him, so he has to be harmless, you know?
excellent, excellent.
Yes.
Awesome. All right. Well, guys, thanks so much for hanging out with us. Go check out the book. Check out Pocket Full of Teeth. Go get it. Follow Aimee on all the places, and we will see you in the next episode.